All right, so today I wanted to demonstrate a couple of tools that I have found to be really powerful tools for building color palettes. They are KGamut, which I've already got open here, and MagicPicker, which I'll be showing you in a little bit. KGamut, just so you know, only works on Windows and Linux, so if you've got a Mac, you're out of luck. Hopefully, maybe they'll port something at some point, but it's a really fantastic tool. So if you've got a Mac and you can find some other way to play around with it or try it out, I highly recommend that. I also want to give a shout out to Nason Hardcastle, who introduced me to KGamut. He's a kick-ass artist that I worked with while I was at Disney, and it would be awesome if he made his own YouTube channel where he just showed off really cool tools that he discovered, because he's always discovering awesome art tools. So shout out to him. I'll add a link to his stuff in the description below. So for us to use these tools, we also have to understand the concept of gamut. If you don't understand what gamut is, you should probably go pick up James Gurney's Color and Light. It's the best starting point for anyone that wants to learn about color or just up their color and rendering and just their understanding of the way that light and color, or color and light in this case, works. You can also do a web search for James Gurney Gamut, and you'll probably find some good blog posts by him about this concept as well. He even has a blog post about KGamut in particular, so I know it's something that he uses. So just as a very quick overview or description of what gamut is, we've got this color wheel here. We have all these options of colors to use. And just to describe what is going on in the color wheel, we've got our colors go around this way, and then as we go to the center of the color wheel, the colors get less saturated. And the color wheel really doesn't have anything to do with light, with value. So this doesn't really show us light and dark. All it shows is what type of color we're getting, what the hue is, and how saturated or desaturated it is. Now what gamut does, gamut basically creates like a boundary. I like to think of it as a little fence. It could be a kind of a little triangle, it could be kind of a little four-sided fence, but it basically creates a little boundary and says only use colors within this certain area. And when you do that, you'll just find that colors really blend together better, they play more nicely together, and you'll also find that you really will learn a lot about how colors work together and why colors work together well. So I'm going to pull an image in here just to show some of the other features of KGamut. I'm sure I'm probably missing stuff here. If you know more about KGamut, about any of the features I'm missing, please let me know. But the first thing I want to do is I want to go through several images and just show you how I use it as a tool for analyzing color and understanding the color palettes that other people are putting together. So the first image I'm going to bring in, this is an image by Matt Rhodes, and just a great sense of temperature and atmosphere going on here. And this is a very classical example of a complementary color scheme. So the gamut here is almost linear. It's just basically going from blue to red. So we got complement here, complement here. One important thing to notice is that there's kind of a bias. There's a bias towards the reds in this image. So the reds are more saturated than the blues. And that's something we're going to see, that's something we're going to see over and over again as we're kind of analyzing some different color schemes. The other thing to point out is that gamut kind of tells us the range of colors that are being used, but it's important to note that there are other principles to using color beyond just gamut. So color is a compositional tool. So I would refer to my video on composition if you want to kind of understand my thoughts on composition. And we'll basically use color within those principles and guidelines that I discussed before. As I drag my mouse around the image, it shows me exactly where on the gamut the color on the image is going. A couple of cool things I want to point out is the most saturated blues are down on this ground level here. And our most saturated yellows and oranges are kind of in these areas right here. So it's important to kind of understand we don't have this blue all over the image. It's kind of down in this area because there's a storyteller purpose being played. And it's a little unfair because for whatever reason, KGamut is cutting off the bottom of this image, so you aren't seeing the full image. But it's important to note, as we're looking at these uses of color, to note where those areas of saturation are being used, how much they cover the image, because those principles are also really important. All right, I want to show you one of my images now. This is an image I just finished, and I thought there was a way you could zoom in on KGamut, and I can't quite figure out how to do it. So you aren't seeing the whole image here. It's kind of getting cut off, but we are still getting the gamut. If you look at this gamut, again, you'll see that it's a simple complementary gamut. One thing I want to point out here is that if you have a good gamut, like a good palette going on, you don't need to have super saturated colors. This is very simple, and also it's pretty muted. This is our most saturated color. It's kind of these greenish yellows here. And again, we are biasing those. Those are more saturated than the other side of the complement. But it's a pretty simple palette, an desaturated palette. Okay, here's another one by one of my favorites, Tomer Hanuka. I love his color palettes. And it's great because he does flat colors, so it's a little bit easier to analyze what's going on with his colors, even though he does some very complex things. And now you'll see here that he's kind of breaking out of this kind of binary complementary gamut. We could, if we wanted to, we could kind of draw a triangular fence around this gamut. Again, our reds, we're kind of biased towards the reds, and it's important to note that look at where those reds are. Those saturated reds are in that, this focal area, right where we want to draw the attention. And then these greens and blues are a little less saturated. One other thing to point out as we're looking at this is the role that value plays. So as we're looking at all of these, you can kind of squint down and you can see the value will be a little bit more clear to you. But the other thing KGamut will do is we can kind of turn off the different, we've got lighter values, middle values, and darker values, and we can kind of see where that gamut goes as far as value. It's kind of interesting to note that we have these reddish colors and these bluish greenish colors are kind of our darkest colors, and those end up in his kind of details of his pants and his pack, and then these plants kind of they're accenting this whole area here. All right, I'm going to show you another one of my images here. So basically this is complementary. We're kind of getting over into a little bit of a triad here. We could do a little triangular fence or maybe even a four-sided fence around here to restrict the gamut. But our oranges, we're biased towards the oranges a little bit more. And just adding a little bit more variety by going into those purples. But notice those purples, we aren't getting super saturated in going into those purples. We don't want to get too far out into that area. The next example I wanted to show is a fantastic example because when you first look at this image, this is James C. Christensen. It looks like there's a ton of going on with the colors. Looks like there's so many colors and it's very complex. But then when we look at the gamut, we see that it's still pretty restrained to a fairly simple gamut. We have this triangular gamut. Our oranges are getting super, super saturated here. We're way biased towards the orange. Our blues are more desaturated. And we're just getting a little bit of variety by poking into those reds there. All right, here's an image by Dave Stewart, colorist for Hellboy. So obviously art by Mike Mignola, colors by Dave Stewart. And this is kind of what looks like more of a Color Neighbors scenario. So one way that people sometimes think about color palettes, some people will be like, oh, this is a complementary palette, this is more of a Color Neighbor palette. And one of the nice things about gamut is gamut kind of breaks you out of that way of thinking of things, and it kind of shows you that they're really kind of the same thing. Like this is really again, this triangular area. And even though he's primarily working with these color neighbors, these yellows, these oranges, and reds, these this kind of third point, this complementary point, plays a big role. Look at how those desaturated purples and blues on the bottom contrast with everything else. It's also important to point out what we learned from this, that this idea of relative color, we don't have to go super far into these blues and these purples to get the contrast, to get these really wonderful colors down here. We just have to desaturate the other colors that we have. I mean, really, they're kind of almost just grays in the middle here, but because of the contrast, they feel cooler. They do feel more like those blues and those purples. All right, we're going to get a little bit more complex here. All right, this is an image by Mingjue Helen Chen. So I think that's how you pronounce the name. Please correct me if I'm wrong. Awesome Sailor Moon image. You can see it's definitely a lot more going on with color. We're really pushing the saturation on these colors, but you can also see that we're still basically falling within this triad of color. So why does this work? So when I look at this image, one of the reasons this image really works is that, again, were you to take out all the color, you can kind of squint down to test it, it works on a value level. So if you can get the values right and you can get an image to work in black and white, you can do a lot with color. And a lot of the color variety is in the extremes. So we have within these dark silhouettes, and if you don't know what silhouette is, again, check out my compositional tutorial. We have a lot of variety in these dark silhouettes, and then we have a lot of variety in these neon signs in the background, which are really matching in value. So pushing things really dark, pushing things lighter, helps to make those disparate colors kind of blend together better. But I would still point out that we are still within an area that we could put a boundary around. We could put a triangle around this. You could even do a much more complex, like, multi-sided shape to bound it, but a triangle would also work. All right, let's look at another kind of more complex one. Enrique Fernandez. And this one just blows my mind. I look at this and it looks like there's so many different colors going on and just trying to figure out how they all play together. Again, we can look at this kind of blob here and we could draw a four-sided shape around it. So it's really sticking within a gamut, and that's why he's able to make these colors play so well together. Again, we do have a color that's kind of that we're more biased towards. It's funny how many of these kind of bias saturation towards yellows and a little bit on the reds there. But again, it's important to look at value. How does this work as value? And also how much of the kind of image area is covered by these different colors on the gamut. All right. One more here. Another Sailor Moon riff. And the kind of, again, we've got so many different colors going on here, but it's still restrained within a certain gamut. We could do a four-sided box around it still. And also, we're not getting too saturated on some of these different colors, these greens and these blues. We're still keeping those within a fairly desaturated area. So it just helps those colors to play more nicely together when they're more desaturated. But again, we could also look at value, and how much of the image space is dedicated to different colors. That could also reveal some things as we look at this. Now, let's say you wanted to use this palette in your own image. What you could do then is do a screen cap of this, of the actual KGamut and the gamut showing up here. Oh, now I can see the whole image. Why wasn't I seeing it before? And you could bring that into your image. You can pick straight from it to, experiment with your own palettes. And so I think that's actually a fantastic way to learn about color palettes. If you're doing an image, look at some other images you like that have color palettes you really like, and just pull those in, put them into KGamut, look at their gamuts, take a screen cap, and then with your own image, pull from that other image and just see what you can learn by using someone else's palette. I probably would start with something more simple than this. Maybe some of the earlier examples I showed would be better places to start, but that's could be a really awesome approach for kind of experimenting and learning your own colors. So that is KGamut. I want to take this now and use it to look at my own image that I'm working on right now, that I'm in the midst of working on. I'm going to use KGamut to kind of analyze the image, and then I'm going to go into Photoshop and we're going to look at MagicPicker and see how we can use MagicPicker to apply some of what we've learned from KGamut. So here's an image from a comic I'm working on right now. You can see where we currently are. That we've got kind of this triangular gamut that we're working within. Kind of yellows, reds, and this complement that's really just going to gray. I don't think we're even going to blue very much. And we just see that in some of these, maybe these beards in some places. But so now I'm looking in this and I'm wondering, how can I use this gamut to make this image better? Well, one of the things I'm looking at is I have this background with these different icons, and it's all kind of one color right now. It's all kind of this like yellowish, greenish color. So one thing I could do is I could go to this gamut, and I have this big gap here between these oranges here and these yellows here. I could go sample within that area and just add some more variety. I would probably keep it the same value, but maybe change saturation a little bit, but just to add a little bit more variety to that background. So that's one idea. The other idea is thinking about adding some more cools into this, although I'm not totally sure how that would work. Maybe in the smoke I could do that, or something like that. But I like the warmness, the basic idea of the warmness of this setting, so I don't want to get too far away from that. All right, so let's open Photoshop now. And I've already got it open in here, like a cooking show, how they put something in the oven and they've already got another one to take out. And let's see, and KGamut's still chilling here, which is cool. All right, so here is MagicPicker. And I want to show you just the standard Photoshop MagicPicker so you can see kind of the difference. So I'm just gonna have to close this for, okay, so here's the standard Photoshop color picker, which I've used for years and years, is fine. This is color changes along this way. And then we've got, saturation here, and we can desaturate it going desaturate it going this way. Left to right is saturation. Then we can go light and we can go dark. So that's the standard Photoshop one. The thing we don't get from this is we don't get those relationships. We're not getting that color wheel. It's much harder to understand what the complements are. How do I figure out the complement of this color within this color picker? So that's the function that MagicPicker fills. And the nice thing about this is I can make it huge and make it really easy to see. So I'm just gonna blow it up gigantic. One important note, I'm just gonna open up KGamut again. Notice how right here, the color wheel matches up. So green is on the upper left-hand side, our orange and reds are on the upper right-hand side. On Color Picker, you have this little icon on the bottom. If you press that, it's gonna change the color wheel and it kind of flips it the other way. And I actually think it's a different color wheel. Like I wonder if this color wheel here is like the James Gurney approved color wheel. And he makes a point of this in Color and Light, so read that if you want to know more about it. But basically he says that most color wheels don't give enough space to kind of the oranges. Oranges should take up more space in the color wheel. So I think that might be what's going on, but it also flips it. So you can see it now, it matches up with KGamut. So if you're in Color Picker, it's not matching up with KGamut, that's probably why. But immediately you can see that the picker is set up in such a way, this little rectangle, that shows you what color we're currently working with. And in this box here, oh, it's actually not showing the complement. It does show it if I move it around maybe. Okay, but anyway, this little rectangle right here is showing us whatever color we're using right now. The triangle, this is saturation, this is desaturation, gray to color, and then we go dark to light that way as we go up and down. So left to right is saturation, up and down is value. Other things to point out. We have this little selection thing here where we can have kind of little preset palettes that just kind of mark off where the palette might end up. You know, you can kind of use any of them. I find, you know, there's complementary, and that's the default. And the triad and the analogic are really the same. It's just a matter of where you move these. So the one downside of color picker is I can't really bookmark my palette, so I have to kind of just go from memory to remember where everything is. But anyway, I'm going to try to kind of match up with this this palette I've been using. And so KGamut is kind of giving me an idea, but I'm not really going to sample from this while I work with the colors. I basically know that I have this gap between yellow and orange that I'm going to think about, so I'm going to minimize that. I'm just going to go into my actual Photoshop and just sample. I'm just going to go through and sample different colors to see like what. So I'm seeing the edge of my yellows is kind of right here. And then my oranges. I was so excited about making color picker huge. Now I'm covering up my image. Oh, did I get something that was like super red? All right, so that's my other bound. Again, I'm looking at, don't think too much about these circles. I'm kind of looking at this little white rectangle. But now I'm gonna kind of trying to mark off with the circles where the edges are of each thing. This is kind of the range I'm gonna work in with right now. And what I already saw from looking at, actually I'm gonna flip this around this way because I also want to think about my complements. So I'm just kind of bookmarking the range of colors that I want to work within. And I'm also looking at this. This is now my complement. I can think about my complement if I do want to use a complement. And so I kind of want to pull some colors from this range in here, this middle area. So I'm going to bring my color back over here. And then I'm just going to look at this. I'm just going to do some quick tests. This isn't final color. I'm just going to drop in a little bit of color to see how it looks. I'm also looking at value. Look at where this is on the triangle. Now I'm going to bring this back over to the oranges. So I'm going to try some stuff within this range. Maybe make it a little more saturated. And then I'm going to go into these background areas and just try dropping a little bit of color here and there and see how it feels. Now, one thing I kind of need to work with here is that this background area already has a little bit of vignetting on it. So I'll have to change my value as I go to different areas. But the idea here is that I just want to create a little bit more variety in that background. I'm not trying to make this stuff jump out a lot. Just make it feel a little bit more interesting, add a little bit of interest. And that's one thing you'll notice about, you know, color in real life. You're not ever really going to have just flat colors in areas. Okay, I'm going to move over a little bit more into this orangey area, but keeping the value the same. But a lot of time when you see color in real life, there's a lot of little subtle variations in color. So when I'm doing coloring, I like to try and add some subtle variation, and that needs to be a little bit darker. So that's kind of the idea there, is I can go through there and kind of test what it would be like if I added a little bit more variation. I could probably go even farther here. I could maybe go a little more saturated even. Yeah, I'm starting, that's a little bit too much now when I look at it. Maybe I could add some color to here. So that's the basic idea. By looking at KGamut, I was able to kind of analyze gaps in this palette and use it just as a tool for deciding how I might want to add a little bit more variety to things. So that's a quick overview of color picker and KGamut. I'm sure there's lots of other things you could do with them, lots of other ways you could play with them, but that's kind of how I use them, how I've used them for kind of restructuring my palettes and solving problems. So I hope that's helpful to you. If you have any other thoughts on it or any other questions, please leave those in the comments below. Let me know what you think, and please subscribe, and we will see you next time.